On the surface, the Hayes family looked like the very definition of stability in small-town Georgia. Their brick home sat neatly on a quiet suburban street, framed by trimmed hedges and a freshly painted white porch swing. To neighbors, Marcus and Tanya Hayes were the couple everyone admired. He, a hard-working man with calloused hands from long hours on construction sites. She, a gentle nurse whose smile could calm even the most frightened patient. Together, they projected warmth, faith, and the kind of marriage that others envied. Marcus Hayes was 42 years old, the kind of man who believed in hard work, Sunday service, and a strict sense of right and wrong. He was quiet but commanding, with a stare that could silence a room. He had grown up in the South, where loyalty, family, and reputation meant everything. For Marcus, a marriage vow wasn't just a promise, it was sacred ground. Tanya, at 38, seemed to complement him perfectly. She had a nurturing spirit and a way of carrying herself that suggested both strength and vulnerability. She was the kind of woman who baked pies for church fundraisers, who remembered every birthday of her friends, who kept the house spotless and the dinner warm. To those around her, she was the embodiment of a devoted wife. But beneath her soft-spoken demeanor, Tanya carried a secret, one that gnawed at her in moments of silence, a secret she prayed would never surface. For 15 years, that secret remained buried. On most days, Tanya could convince herself it didn't matter. She loved Marcus, she supported him, and in return, he gave her a stable life. But the truth never left her. It lingered like a shadow, following her into every kiss, every embrace, every night they shared. The evening of Tanya's birthday should have been a celebration of love and partnership. Marcus had come home with a bouquet of deep red roses, their fragrance filling the kitchen as Tanya placed them in a vase. The dining room was lit softly by candles. A small chocolate cake sat on the table, its flickering candles reflecting in Tanya's glassy eyes. She wanted the night to be perfect. She wanted Marcus to see her as the same woman he had fallen in love with, unbroken, flawless, whole. Marcus poured 2 glasses of wine and set one before her. He leaned back in his chair, studying her in the dim glow. His voice carried both affection and something harder, something that hinted at suspicion. 15 years, he said with a faint smile. And you still look the same as the day I married you. Tanya tried to smile back, but her hands trembled as she lifted her glass. I just want us to stay like this, she whispered, her voice almost breaking. To anyone else, it would have sounded like a sweet exchange between husband and wife. But for Tanya, those words carried desperation. She wasn't just celebrating another year of life. She was fighting to keep the facade intact, to hold on to the marriage she had built on a carefully guarded lie. Across the table, Marcus studied her with the kind of look that made Tanya's heart tighten. He was a man who noticed details, who measured people not just by what they said, but by what they didn't. And that night, Tanya felt as though he could see right through her. As the candles burned low, the air thickened with an unspoken tension. Outside, cicadas hummed into the warm Georgia night, but inside the Hayes home, silence pressed down like a weight. Tanya reached across the table, her fingers brushing his hand. Marcus didn't pull away, but the warmth that had once flowed easily between them was faltering. Neither of them knew it yet, but this birthday, the night that began with roses and candlelight, was the night their marriage would shatter forever. Within hours, the perfect family picture would be destroyed by a revelation so intimate, so deeply personal, it would leave blood on the walls and a community in shock. To understand the tragedy that unfolded inside the Hayes home, you have to step back into Tanya's past, into the choices she made long before Marcus ever entered her life. Tanya grew up in Atlanta, the youngest of 3 daughters in a modest household. Her parents worked long hours, her father as a mechanic, her mother cleaning houses, leaving Tanya with freedom her older sisters never had. By the time she was a teenager, she was pretty, curious, and eager for attention. And attention, she learned quickly, was something she could command. College opened that world even further. Away from home, Tanya indulged in a lifestyle she never spoke about later. She dated frequently, jumped from one relationship to another, and sought validation in places that left scars no one could see. Nights blurred into mornings, and with every new partner came a fleeting sense of power, followed by the quiet ache of emptiness. By her mid-20s, Tanya had gained a reputation among her circle of friends. Some whispered behind her back, others envied her boldness. But Tanya, deep down, wasn't proud of it. She wanted love, not conquests. She wanted permanence, not nights that ended in strangers' arms. And when she looked in the mirror, she no longer recognized the woman staring back at her. That's when she met Marcus. Marcus was different from anyone she had known. He was steady, traditional, a man of faith and responsibility. He wasn't impressed by parties or careless flings. He wanted something real. And Tanya, weary of her past, wanted desperately to be the kind of woman he could marry. From their first date at a small diner off a Georgia highway, she knew this man represented the future she craved. But there was a problem. Tanya carried more than memories. Her reckless past had left behind physical consequences, changes to her body she feared would betray her. She knew Marcus valued purity, modesty, and loyalty. What would he think if he discovered the truth? That she had lived a different life before him? That she was not the untouched, perfect woman he imagined? The thought terrified her. So Tanya made a decision. Before their wedding, she visited a private clinic under a different name. The procedure was marketed as discreet, a way for women to renew themselves, to restore what time and choices had altered. For Tanya, it wasn't vanity. It was survival. It was the only way she believed she could step into her marriage without fear of exposure. She remembered lying on that cold surgical table, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, her fingers clutching the thin blanket. She whispered a prayer. Please, God, let this be my second chance. Let him never know. When it was over, the doctor assured her everything would heal, that no one would ever notice. Tanya left the clinic sore but relieved. She smiled at her reflection, convinced she could finally bury her past for good. And for years, she did. Marriage with Marcus gave her the stability she longed for. She cooked his favorite meals, stood beside him at church, laughed with him in the backyard on summer nights. When neighbors saw them hand in hand, Tanya felt a surge of pride. She had remade herself. But deep down, the secret gnawed at her. Every time Marcus touched her, every time his eyes lingered too long, she felt the weight of that hidden scar. She lived with the constant fear that one day, somehow, he would find out. Sometimes, late at night, Tanya lay awake, listening to Marcus's steady breathing beside her. She would whisper into the dark, "I love you. If you only knew how much, you'd forgive me." But she never told him. Instead, she carried on, smiling at neighbors, nurturing patience, hosting barbecues in the summer. To the world, she was flawless. To Marcus, she was loyal. But in Tanya's heart, there was always the shadow of what she had done, the surgery that turned her into the woman she thought he wanted. She never imagined that the very thing meant to save her marriage would one day destroy it. The night began in tenderness. Marcus had worked late, but he still carried home a bouquet of roses wrapped in cellophane, their petals deep crimson against the cool night air. Tanya smiled when he handed them to her, though the smile didn't quite reach her eyes. She arranged them carefully in a glass vase on the dining room table, alongside the chocolate cake he had picked up from a local bakery. 15 candles glowed softly, casting shadows across the room. For a while, it felt like a celebration. Marcus poured 2 glasses of red wine, and Tanya took hers with trembling fingers. They clinked glasses, and for a fleeting moment, she allowed herself to believe that everything was safe, that her secret would remain buried forever. The couple laughed about old memories, about the first time Marcus had tried to cook dinner and burned the chicken, about the summer Tanya insisted on learning tennis and quit after 2 lessons. It was the kind of easy banter that long marriages are built on, and for a while, Tanya relaxed into it. But Marcus had a way of looking at her, a gaze that was both affectionate and penetrating, as if he were searching for something hidden behind her eyes. Tanya noticed it more than once that evening, and each time, a knot tightened in her stomach. Later, after the cake had been cut and the dishes pushed aside, Marcus leaned forward, his hand brushing against hers. 15 years, he said quietly. We've been through a lot together. Tanya nodded, her throat tightening. Yes, we have. He tilted his head, studying her face. And you've always been honest with me, haven't you, Tanya? The question was casual in tone, but heavy with meaning. Tanya froze, her heart pounding. She forced a smile, whispering, "Of course I have." Marcus said nothing more, but the silence that followed was louder than words. As the evening drifted toward its end, Marcus suggested they go upstairs. Tanya hesitated for a moment, then followed him into the bedroom. The air smelled faintly of roses and candle smoke, the soft light of a lamp spilling across the bedspread. It should have been intimate, comforting. Instead, Tanya felt exposed. When Marcus reached for her, she tried to steady her breathing, tried to silence the storm in her chest. She wanted to give him affection, to end the night in closeness. But fate had other plans. It happened suddenly. A touch, a shift, Marcus's hand brushing against her in just the wrong place. He stiffened, his brow furrowed as his fingers traced the faint ridge of scar tissue Tanya had hoped would never be noticed. He pulled back, confusion darkening his face. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice low but sharp. Tanya's body went cold. Her lips parted, but no words came. Marcus sat up, his eyes locked on her. "What the hell is this, Tanya? Some kind of surgery?" She scrambled for words, her hands trembling. "Marcus, please, let me explain." "Explain?" His voice rose. "Explain what? That you let me believe I knew everything about you? That you let me think I was your first real love, your only man? And now I find this." He jabbed a finger toward her, his face twisted with betrayal. Tears streamed down Tanya's cheeks. "I did it before we got married. I was scared, Marcus. I wanted to be enough for you. I didn't want you to know about my past. I just wanted to start fresh." Marcus's jaw tightened, his breath ragged. "So you lied to me for 15 years. Every single time, you let me think I knew the truth. But I didn't. I didn't know you at all." Tanya reached for him, her sobs breaking through the silence. "No, you do know me. I love you, Marcus. I did it because I love you. Because I wanted our marriage to work." But Marcus recoiled from her touch. His eyes burned with rage, humiliation, and the crushing weight of betrayal. To him, the revelation wasn't about a medical procedure. It was about deception, about the feeling that the woman he trusted most had built their entire marriage on a lie. He stood, pacing the room, his fists clenched at his sides. "I thought you were different, Tanya. I thought you were honest, pure. And all this time," his voice cracked as he turned on her. "All this time, you've been hiding from me." Tanya collapsed onto the bed, sobbing uncontrollably. "Marcus, please. I beg you, don't let this ruin us. I'm still the same woman you fell in love with. Nothing has changed. Nothing." But for Marcus, everything had changed. The night that began with roses, wine, and laughter was now poisoned with suspicion and despair. Marcus stormed out of the bedroom, slamming the door behind him. Tanya lay trembling, staring at the ceiling, knowing she had finally lost control of the secret she had guarded for so long. Downstairs, Marcus opened a bottle of bourbon, pouring glass after glass as anger built inside him. The image of Tanya's scar replayed in his mind, each time sharper, more unbearable. He felt cheated, mocked, humiliated. In his eyes, the marriage he had once believed sacred had turned into a lie he could no longer endure. 2 hours later, that fury would return to the bedroom. And when it did, blood would follow. The slam of the bedroom door echoed through the quiet house like a gunshot. Marcus stormed down the stairs, his boots heavy against the wood, his chest heaving with every breath. He wasn't sure what burned more, the whiskey he was about to pour, or the betrayal searing through his veins. In the kitchen, he yanked open the cabinet above the fridge and pulled down a half-empty bottle of bourbon. Without bothering with a glass, he twisted the cap off and drank straight from the neck. The liquor scorched his throat, but it dulled nothing. His rage only grew sharper, his mind spinning with images he couldn't control. Tanya in the past, with men he didn't know, doing things she'd never confessed. He slammed the bottle onto the counter and muttered through gritted teeth. She lied. 15 years, and she lied. Marcus had always prided himself on being a man of principle. He worked hard, kept his vows, provided for his family. He wasn't perfect, no man was, but he believed in truth. And now he felt that truth had been ripped from under him. Every swallow of bourbon made his imagination crueler. He saw Tanya laughing in the arms of strangers, pictured her making choices that stained their marriage long before it began. And then, her surgery. That word burned in his mind like acid. Surgery meant shame. Surgery meant she had tried to cover something up. "She wanted me to believe I was her first," Marcus hissed, pacing the kitchen floor. "Wanted me to think I was the only man." He took another pull from the bottle, the liquid spilling onto his shirt. But I was nothing but the fool who didn't know better. He stumbled to the living room and sank onto the couch, his eyes glassy, the bourbon still clutched in his fist. The house was silent except for the ticking clock on the wall. Each second felt like a countdown, pushing him deeper into the storm inside his head. He thought of the men he worked with on construction sites, the way they talked when they thought no one was listening. If they knew his wife had needed surgery, if they ever found out, he would be humiliated, laughed at, torn down. Marcus gritted his teeth. She made me a joke. The bourbon was half gone now, and his mind no longer separated imagination from fact. Every insecurity he had ever buried rose to the surface, each one pointing back to Tanya. He saw her tears upstairs, begging him to forgive her, insisting she had done it for love. But in Marcus's poisoned mind, those words sounded hollow. She did it for me, he muttered bitterly. No, she did it because she knew the truth would disgust me. Marcus stood, swaying slightly. He stumbled toward the window and stared out at the darkened street. The quiet suburban neighborhood seemed to mock him. Every porch light, every neatly parked car belonged to families who, in his mind, had wives he could trust, women who didn't hide behind scars. Anger welled in his chest until he felt he couldn't breathe. He threw the bourbon bottle against the wall, shattering glass across the hardwood floor. Shards glittered under the light, a reflection of the broken man he had become in just a few hours. He pressed his palms against his face, his voice breaking into the empty room. Why didn't she tell me? Why didn't she trust me? But another voice, darker and louder, answered in his head, because she knew you'd never accept her. Marcus stumbled back toward the hallway, each step heavier than the last. His thoughts spiraled between pain and rage, between humiliation and the desperate urge to reclaim control. Upstairs, Tanya lay curled on the bed, waiting, praying he would come back with forgiveness. She didn't know the storm that was marching toward her. Before he climbed the stairs, Marcus paused at the hall closet. His trembling hand reached inside, closing around the cold steel of the pistol he kept hidden away. He pulled it out, the weight of it anchoring his fury. For a long moment, he stared at the weapon, his reflection warped in its metal surface. He whispered to himself, voice low and shaking. She thought she could lie to me. She thought I'd never find out. But she was wrong. The decision wasn't made in words. It was made in the silence that followed, in the way Marcus's jaw set, in the way his hands steadied as he gripped the gun. He climbed the stairs slowly, his steps deliberate, the house groaning beneath his weight. The bourbon still burned in his blood, but now it carried purpose. A terrible purpose. In the bedroom, Tanya stirred at the sound of the doorknob turning. She sat up, her face streaked with tears, her hands trembling in her lap. She opened her mouth to speak, to beg once more, but when the door swung open, she saw the gun. And in Marcus's eyes, she saw no husband, no forgiveness. Only a man who believed he had been deceived beyond repair. The storm had arrived. The doorknob turned slowly, and Tanya's heart skipped. She sat up, wiping at her swollen eyes, praying Marcus had cooled off, that he would come back with words instead of anger. But when the door creaked open, the glint of metal in his hand froze her blood. Marcus stepped inside, his frame filling the doorway. In the dim glow of the lamp, the pistol looked heavier than it was, his grip steady despite the bourbon burning through his veins. His face was hard, carved by rage and something darker, humiliation. Tanya gasped, her voice breaking. Marcus, please no. Put that down. He shut the door behind him, the click echoing like a lock sealing her fate. You think you can lie to me for 15 years, he muttered, his voice low, deliberate, and then beg me to forgive you with tears? You think that erases the truth? Her hands trembled as she reached toward him, palms open. I didn't lie to hurt you. I lied because I was scared. I thought if you knew who I really was, you'd walk away. And I couldn't stand losing you. Marcus's jaw clenched. So instead you built a marriage on lies. Every night, every word, every touch, all of it was fake. No, Tanya sobbed, her voice raw. It wasn't fake. I loved you with everything I had. That's the truth. Marcus, look at me. But Marcus wouldn't meet her eyes. He paced the room slowly, the gun never leaving his hand, his boots dragging against the carpet. His words came in short, bitter bursts. I worked my whole life to give you stability, to be a man you could trust. And all this time, you were laughing at me, making me the fool. I never laughed at you, Tanya whispered, tears streaking her face. You were my salvation. You saved me from my past. He stopped pacing and turned toward her. His voice rose, sharp and cutting. I didn't save you. You tricked me. You covered your tracks with some doctor's knife and thought I'd never find out. Her body shook as she slid from the bed to the floor, crawling closer, desperation in every movement. Marcus, I was broken, and I fixed myself for you. Don't you see? I did it because I loved you. Because I wanted to be the woman you deserved. The words landed like sparks in dry grass. Fuel, not water. Marcus's face twisted with pain and fury. He raised the gun, his hands trembling but his aim firm. The woman I deserved didn't have to lie. Tanya's scream ripped through the room. No. Marcus, please. In that suspended second, as the gun leveled at her chest, time seemed to shatter into fragments. Tanya's scream hung in the air, but inside her mind, a flood of memories surged like a desperate tide. She saw herself at 19, laughing too loudly at a college party, clutching a drink she didn't need, chasing affection she didn't understand. She saw the faces of men who had passed through her life, each one leaving her emptier, lonelier than before. Shame rippled through her even now, but so did a quiet defiance. I was searching for love. I was searching for something real. Her thoughts leapt to the day she met Marcus. That small diner off the Georgia highway, the smell of fried food and strong coffee. The way he looked at her, not as a conquest, not as a fleeting distraction, but as though she mattered. For the first time, Tanya believed she could be more than her past. That look had changed everything. Marcus, you saved me, she thought, tears burning her eyes. You gave me a chance to start over. And then came the memory of the clinic, the cold surgical table, the sterile light above her, the whispered prayers she had repeated until her throat was raw. Please, God, let this be my second chance. She had believed it worked. She had walked out of that clinic believing she could bury her past forever. She thought Marcus would never know. Now he knew, and the truth had become her death sentence. Her eyes locked on his face, on the man she had loved for 15 years. His expression was twisted by pain and betrayal, but beneath the rage, she still glimpsed the man she had married. The man who once held her in the backyard on summer nights, laughing under the stars. Marcus, she whispered through trembling lips, though her voice barely carried. Please believe me. I only ever loved you. In her chest, panic collided with sorrow. She wasn't ready to die. She thought of the little things, unfinished laundry folded in the basket, the roses still fresh in their vase downstairs, the birthday cake that would never be eaten. And she thought of her mother, who would soon stand over her coffin and weep for the daughter who wanted so badly to be loved. A single, desperate thought rose in her mind. If only I had told him the truth. If only I had trusted him. But another truth cut just as sharply. He never would have forgiven me. Not Marcus. Not the man who prized perfection above all else. Her tears blurred the room into streaks of light and shadow. The last image she saw clearly was Marcus's finger tightening on the trigger, his jaw set, his eyes wet but merciless. For Tanya Hayes, the past had never really died. It had only waited, hidden beneath a scar. And now, in the final second of her life, that scar had returned to claim everything. She closed her eyes, whispering one final plea, not to Marcus, but to God. Please forgive me. The sound of the gunshot cracked through the house, louder than thunder, louder than anything. Tanya collapsed onto the carpet, blood spreading beneath her like a cruel shadow. Her body convulsed once, then stilled, her eyes wide with terror that never had time to fade. The silence that followed was unbearable. Marcus stood frozen, staring at what he had done. The pistol slipped from his hand and clattered onto the floor. His breath came in ragged gasps, the reality settling into his chest like cement. He fell to his knees beside her, pressing his shaking hands against the wound as if he could undo it, as if love could rewind time. No, no, no. Tanya, don't leave me, he whispered, his voice breaking. I didn't mean it. I didn't. But it was too late. The life in Tanya's eyes was gone, replaced by a glassy stillness that pierced him deeper than any blade. Marcus rocked back and forth, tears streaming down his face, his shirt soaked in his wife's blood. He had wanted the truth. Now all he had was silence. Minutes passed, or maybe hours, he couldn't tell. The clock ticked steadily, mocking him. He staggered to his feet, and stumbled toward the window, staring out at the quiet neighborhood bathed in moonlight. Behind every closed door, families slept peacefully, unaware that inside the Hayes home, love had turned into death. Marcus pressed his forehead against the glass, his voice barely a whisper. If she had only told me, if she had just trusted me. But deep inside, he knew the truth. Even if Tanya had confessed, he might never have accepted it. His pride, his image, his obsession with purity, they had always been stronger than his capacity to forgive. Down the street, a dog barked. Somewhere, a car door slammed. Life outside carried on as usual, indifferent to the crime that had just unfolded. Back in the bedroom, Marcus returned to Tanya's body, sinking onto the floor beside her. He touched her hair gently, almost tenderly, as though she might wake. I loved you, he whispered. God help me, I loved you. But love, twisted by lies and rage, had left nothing behind but a corpse on the carpet and a man drowning in the ruin of his own making. The gunshot had barely faded when silence reclaimed the house. Marcus sat frozen on the bedroom floor, his wife's blood drying on his hands, her lifeless body inches away. He stared at the crimson stains spreading across the carpet, too stunned to move, too shattered to fully comprehend the crime he had committed. Then came the knock. It was faint at first, hesitant, a neighbor checking after hearing what they thought was a firecracker in the night. When no one answered, the knocks turned louder, sharper. Then came voices. Marcus? Tanya? You all right in there? Marcus didn't answer. He sat in the dark, rocking slowly, murmuring words that no one could hear. Minutes later, flashing red and blue lights splashed across the quiet street. The neighbors had called 911. 2 patrol cars pulled up to the curb, their doors swinging open as officers approached with caution. One spoke into his radio. Possible domestic disturbance. Neighbors report a loud bang. Sounded like a gunshot. The officers reached the front door, weapons drawn. They knocked once, twice, then forced it open. The hinges groaned as the door gave way. Inside, the house smelled faintly of bourbon and gunpowder. The officers swept through the living room, calling out, Police! Anyone here? Upstairs, Marcus heard them. Slowly, he rose from the floor, his face blank, his eyes hollow. He glanced one last time at Tanya, then turned toward the door. When the officers climbed the stairs, guns raised, they found him standing in the hallway, his shirt soaked in blood. His hands lifted halfway, trembling. She's in there, Marcus whispered. His voice was hoarse, distant. I killed her. The officers rushed past him into the bedroom. The sight stopped them cold. Tanya sprawled across the carpet, her chest still, the blood spreading in a wide, dark pool. One officer checked for a pulse, though the outcome was clear. He looked at his partner, shaking his head. She's gone. They turned back to Marcus, who slumped against the wall, sliding down to the floor. His words came in a broken stream. She lied to me. I couldn't take it anymore. The officers moved quickly, securing him in handcuffs. The cold steel clinked shut around his wrists. As they led him down the stairs, Marcus muttered under his breath, his voice trembling. 15 years. She never told me the truth. Outside, the neighborhood had gathered in hushed clusters under the flashing lights. Neighbors whispered as Marcus was escorted to the patrol car, his head bowed, his face streaked with tears. To them, the Hayes family had always seemed solid, respectable. Now, their street was a crime scene. Detectives arrived within the hour, along with a medical examiner and forensic team. Cameras flashed. Evidence markers were laid out across the bedroom. The pistol was bagged, the shattered bourbon bottle collected. Tanya's body was carefully lifted onto a stretcher, her lifeless form hidden under a white sheet. Detective James Carver, a seasoned investigator with tired eyes, surveyed the scene. He crouched by the blood-stained carpet, running a hand across his jaw. Domestic, he muttered to his partner. Clean. Quick. He snapped. In the patrol car, Marcus sat in silence, staring out the window at the house he would never enter again. The porch lights still glowed, illuminating the roses he had brought hours earlier. They looked almost surreal now, symbols of love turned to tragedy. At the station, detectives began their work. They recorded his statement, his words tumbling out in fragments. She lied, surgery. I didn't know. I thought she was pure. His voice cracked again and again, switching between anger and grief. But no amount of explanation could erase the fact. Tanya was dead, and Marcus had pulled the trigger. The investigation would be straightforward. The confession was immediate, the evidence overwhelming. What remained was the question of why, a question that would haunt the community, the courtroom, and Marcus himself. For now, the tragedy was sealed in blood and silence. The Hayes home, once the picture of domestic bliss, had become another crime scene marked by tape, photographs, and the echoes of a gunshot no one could take back. The trial of State versus Marcus Hayes opened 6 months later in a packed Georgia courthouse. By then, the story had made its way through every local paper and evening broadcast. The headlines were brutal. Man kills wife after discovering secret surgery. To some, Marcus was a cold-blooded killer. To others, he was a man driven past his breaking point by betrayal. Inside the courtroom, the air was thick with anticipation. The gallery was filled with neighbors, co-workers, even distant relatives who had flown in to witness the spectacle. Tanya's family sat in the first row, dressed in black, their faces hardened with grief. Behind them, friends from church wept quietly, clutching tissues. Marcus entered in an orange jumpsuit, his wrists shackled. He looked older than his 42 years, the weight of guilt carved into the lines on his face. His eyes scanned the room briefly before dropping to the floor. Judge Harold Benton, a stern man with silver hair, presided over the trial. His gavel struck, and the proceedings began. The prosecution went first. District Attorney Paul Harrington stood tall, his voice crisp and commanding. He painted Marcus as a violent man who had chosen pride over love, rage over reason. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Harrington began, pacing before them. This case is not about betrayal. It is not about secrets. It is about murder. Marcus Hayes shot his wife in cold blood. He had choices that night. He could have walked away. He could have sought help. He could have confronted his emotions like any man should. Instead, he picked up a gun. And in doing so, he stole the life of a woman who loved him. The jury sat silent, their eyes fixed on Harrington as he pointed toward Marcus at the defense table. Don't be fooled by tears now. Regret does not erase responsibility. Tanya Hayes is dead, and the only reason, his voice rose, sharp as a blade, is sitting right there. Gasps echoed in the gallery. Tanya's mother sobbed openly, her body shaking as she buried her face in her hands. The defense countered with a different story. Marcus's attorney, Caroline Mitchell, was young but fiery, her voice trembling with conviction. Yes, Marcus Hayes pulled the trigger, she admitted to the jury. That fact is undeniable. But this case is about context. It's about the unbearable weight of a secret that shattered his world. For 15 years, he believed his marriage was built on honesty, only to discover it had been built on a lie. He was blindsided, humiliated, broken. This wasn't premeditated murder. This was the act of a man pushed into a storm of emotions he couldn't control. She turned to the jury, her eyes searching theirs. We don't excuse what he did, but we ask you to understand it. To see Marcus not as a monster, but as a man who loved his wife, who made a terrible, irreversible mistake in a moment of despair. The testimony was raw. Detectives described the crime scene, the shattered bourbon bottle, the blood-soaked carpet. The medical examiner recounted Tanya's final moments in clinical detail, the bullet wound that ended her life. By the time the trial began, the Hayes case had become a sensation across Georgia. Local news anchors dissected every detail, and tabloids ran with lurid headlines. Betrayal behind suburban walls, and the secret surgery that ended in blood. National outlets even picked it up, presenting the story as a tragic cautionary tale of secrets, pride, and violence. The courthouse steps were lined with reporters every morning, microphones thrust forward as attorneys brushed past without comment. Inside, after the detectives and medical examiner, the prosecution called a witness who made the gallery stir, Dr. Leonard Abrams, the surgeon who had performed Tanya's procedure 15 years earlier. Gray-haired, calm, and professional, he stepped to the stand with a thin folder of records. Dr. Abrams, the prosecutor began. Can you confirm for the court whether Mrs. Tanya Hayes was once your patient? Yes, he replied firmly. In 2007, under a different last name. She came to me for a procedure known as vaginoplasty, commonly performed for medical, reconstructive, or personal reasons. The courtroom buzzed. Tanya's family looked down, tears in their eyes, as the intimate details of her secret became public record. And to your knowledge, the prosecutor pressed, was the surgery successful? Dr. Abrams nodded. Yes. Physically, it was routine. But she was very emotional that day. She told me she wanted a second chance, a fresh start before marrying a man she loved. She said she never wanted him to know. A gasp rippled through the gallery. The defense rose for cross-examination. Caroline Mitchell's voice was sharp but controlled. Doctor, in your professional opinion, does undergoing such a procedure make someone unworthy of love? Does it erase their ability to be an honest, devoted spouse? Dr. Abrams shook his head. Of course not. It was simply a medical choice, one she made out of fear and shame. What she needed was acceptance, not judgment. Those words lingered in the courtroom, hanging in the air like an accusation, not at Tanya, but at Marcus. The prosecution then leaned on the impact of the media itself. They submitted clippings of headlines, arguing that Marcus was not only furious at Tanya's secret, but also terrified of public humiliation if it were ever discovered. They framed him as a man who cared more about reputation than life. Mr. Hayes was consumed by pride, Harrington declared, holding up a newspaper front page. This wasn't about love. It was about image. And when that image cracked, he chose murder. The jury watched, stone-faced, as the prosecution's narrative grew heavier. Each testimony, each headline, each word seemed to stack against Marcus, painting him not as a grieving husband, but as a man who let his ego pull the trigger. Then came Marcus himself. Taking the stand, his voice cracked as he recounted that night. I found out something I didn't know, something she kept from me all those years. I thought I knew her. I thought I knew everything. And when I realized I didn't, his words trailed off as tears streamed down his face. I snapped. I wasn't thinking. I couldn't see past the anger. The prosecutor pounced during cross-examination. So because you were angry, Mr. Hayes, you picked up a gun? Because you felt humiliated, you decided your wife should die? Marcus lowered his head, unable to meet the prosecutor's glare. I wish I could take it back, he whispered. God, I wish I could. The courtroom fell into heavy silence. Closing arguments were a battle of narratives. The prosecution hammered home that pride was no excuse for murder. Secrets do not justify bullets, Harrington thundered. The defense begged the jury for mercy, arguing for manslaughter instead of murder. When the jury retired to deliberate, the room buzzed with whispers. Tanya's family clutched each other's hands, waiting, praying. Marcus sat motionless, staring at the table, his lawyer's hand resting gently on his shoulder. Hours later, the jury returned. The foreman rose, his voice steady as he delivered the verdict, guilty of murder in the first degree. A cry rang out from Tanya's mother, echoing through the chamber. Marcus closed his eyes, tears slipping down his cheeks. Judge Benton's gavel struck once, the sound final. The defendant is sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The room erupted, some in relief, others in sorrow. The bailiff led Marcus away in chains. He glanced back only once, his eyes lingering on the gallery where Tanya's picture sat framed in her sister's lap. For the Hayes family, justice had been delivered. For Marcus, there was only the long road of regret, stretching behind iron bars, haunted by the ghost of the woman he claimed to love. When the courtroom emptied and the cameras left, what remained was silence, a silence that stretched from the Hayes home to the hearts of those who had once admired the couple. The red brick house with the white porch swing was now only a crime scene in memory. Neighbors passed it with lowered voices, remembering the roses on the table, the candles that burned too briefly, and the sound of a gunshot that shattered their street forever. For Tanya's family, there was no true justice. They buried her beneath the oaks in a quiet cemetery outside Atlanta. At the funeral, her mother's voice trembled as she whispered to the casket, "You wanted to be loved, baby. That's all you ever wanted." Friends spoke of her kindness, her laughter, her devotion as a nurse who cared for strangers more gently than she cared for herself. Yet behind every word lingered the unspoken question. What if she had trusted Marcus with the truth from the start? Marcus, meanwhile, began his life sentence in a gray cell, his world reduced to concrete walls and steel bars. Other inmates saw only a broken man who spent hours staring at the floor, whispering prayers no one could hear. Guards said he kept a Bible by his bunk, flipping to the same verse again and again, The truth shall set you free. But freedom was something he had forfeited the night he pulled the trigger. In prison, Marcus became a ghost of himself. He rarely spoke, except in hushed prayers or brief words to guards. Other inmates, hardened men who had committed violent crimes, often whispered about him when he passed. That's the guy who killed his wife over surgery. Some mocked him, others pitied him, but Marcus carried it all in silence. At night, when the block was quiet, he lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying Tanya's final moments again and again. He heard her scream, saw her eyes wide with fear, and felt the weight of the gun in his hands as though it had never left. Sleep came only in fragments, and when it did, it was filled with nightmares of blood on the carpet and roses wilting in a vase downstairs. He wrote letters, dozens of them, to Tanya. Pages and pages filled with apologies, confessions, prayers. But none of them were ever sent. The prison chaplain, the only one Marcus spoke to regularly, said he would leave the letters stacked neatly in a box under his bunk. Maybe God will read them for me, Marcus told him with a broken smile. Occasionally, journalists requested interviews, drawn by the lurid fascination of his case. Marcus refused them all. He didn't want to be a headline again. He didn't want to explain himself anymore. His words, he felt, had already killed the only person he truly loved. The only time Marcus showed flashes of life was when he saw photos of Tanya during prison programs that retold his case as a cautionary story. He would reach out with trembling fingers, touching her face through the glass of a laminated sheet, whispering, "I loved you, Tanya. I swear I did." To fellow inmates, he was a cautionary tale, a man whose pride destroyed him more thoroughly than any prison sentence ever could. To the guards, he was just another broken soul counting days that would never end. And to Marcus himself, each sunrise in that concrete cage was a reminder of the single moment when rage won over love, a reminder that he had pulled the trigger, and with it, destroyed not just Tanya's life, but his own. The community wrestled with the tragedy. In church sermons, pastors spoke of the dangers of pride, of the cost of secrecy. At barbershops and diners, men debated whether Marcus had been pushed beyond reason or whether he had always carried violence inside him. Women shook their heads, torn between sympathy for his betrayal and outrage at his cruelty. Beyond the courthouse and the cemetery, the Hayes case ignited conversations far outside their Georgia neighborhood. Pastors across the South used the story as a sermon point, warning congregations about the danger of building marriages on fear and silence. Secrets are seeds, one preacher told his flock. They grow in the dark, and when the storm comes, they destroy everything in their path. Local newspapers ran editorials about the expectations placed on women in conservative communities. One column asked pointedly, "How many Tanyas are out there, reshaping themselves to fit an image that was never real?" Others critiqued Marcus as a symbol of toxic pride, the kind of masculinity that demands perfection but cannot bear truth. At a university in Atlanta, a panel discussion titled "Love, Secrecy, and Violence in the South" drew students, professors, and community leaders. They debated whether Tanya's deception was born from her own choices or from a culture that left her no safe space to confess. The media attention gave the case a life of its own. Documentaries picked it up, framing it as both a true crime tragedy and a cautionary tale about gender, pride, and silence. The Hayes name became shorthand for a kind of hidden marital fracture that no one wants to admit, but many recognized in their own communities. For older Americans especially, the story struck a nerve. Letters to local papers reflected their anguish. Some condemned Marcus as a murderer with no excuse. Others, shockingly, sympathized, calling Tanya's secret an unforgivable betrayal. The divide revealed how deeply cultural expectations of marriage and purity still ran in the South. Even years later, the Hayes case was cited whenever whispers of domestic violence arose in small towns. It became more than one couple's tragedy. It became a mirror, forcing families to ask hard questions. What do we hide from the ones we love? And what would happen if the truth finally came out? What remained clear was this: 2 lives had been destroyed. Tanya's secret, born from fear and shame, had been her attempt to start over, to create a love without blemish. Marcus's response, fueled by anger and wounded pride, had turned that love into a grave. In the years that followed, the Hayes case became a cautionary tale whispered across Georgia, a story of how silence can fester, how pride can poison, and how love, without truth, can collapse into violence. For those who knew Tanya, her memory was a reminder of fragility. For those who knew Marcus, he became a warning of what happens when a man lets humiliation dictate his actions. And for everyone who heard their story, one lesson remained etched in their minds. In marriage, honesty may wound, but deceit can kill.